Should we actually talk about the big boys now? Because here's the thing.
No, let's talk about G2 first. Let's talk about G2 first.
That's what I mean, though. Like, to me,
yeah,
it's the G2 versus T1 in the game was setting up now, right? So we've done T1, we've done RNG. What we have to ask now is this. Forget the moment, the brief moment where they actually were in trouble and everyone's like, oh my God, they might not even make the playoffs. Like, first of all, motherfucker, stop banking on Shanghai, Buffalo to beat G2. Don't be that fucking ridiculous, you idiots. But okay, they were always going to make it to me and they made it in third anyway, so it doesn't even really matter. That's ultimately where they were going to be anyway, probably, except if you believe the miracle of the beginning of the thing. So let's start there, actually, Orcs. You know where they were on this streak, where they have put together, we talked about this already. It is insane you could ever win 24 games in a row, and some of them were series, most of them were like champions of their regions or top teams. Like that, at that point of G2, what did you think of how they started out? Like, what do you think of their strengths? Why were they so good?
I thought they had a better read in the meta than the other teams. I feel like they'd sort of gone into this like, so critically we saw RNG like picking the Ezreal and the Kai'Sa, which meant like, especially for RNG, you want like the most aggressive early team. You're always going to have a point where the enemy carries that value in you. And they just leaned heavily into these team fights, which was the meta in EU. And we saw even against T1 as well, they had like this aggressive team fighting composition where they had multiple ways of forcing snap engages, and it worked really well into both of them. So I thought they had a good read on the meta, and so that gave them the ability to beat these teams in a best of one. But like even the T1 game, if like both games, it felt like you had to have some help from the other side, right? So I felt more positively about G2 than I did before the tournament, but I think people were going like overboard. But the crazy thing to me, because I feel like them having those 2 wins and having a better read the meta, and then the other teams catching up would have been one thing. But the thing that was insane, like I feel like the word of the day is Whiplash, is that they regressed. Like they were somehow ahead of the curve, and then it's not even that they got caught up with, they like went backwards. And like that one they had against PSG with like the corky made for caps, I was like, what am I seeing? And like against RNG, the Yuumi for Targamas, and then the flashless Riven, I was like, the thing is, if they'd come into Rumble stage and done that, and then they'd improved, I'm like, yeah. But it's the fact it went the other way around. I'm like, what are you doing? I mean, I remember like some people were saying like, oh, they're undefeated, they're 4 on the Rumble stage, they can afford to take it seriously. And I'm like, dude, they were in a position where you could have realistically seen them. They could have gotten like first seed if they continued.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, and first seed is broken because it's guaranteed finals. Because
they could pick EG.
Yeah, exactly. Like you could have had RNG and T1 kill each other, and it would have been. And people were like, I don't know. I feel like
on the Rumble stage, they started out as an old wise man, and you've seen all of everything. Eventually, there was a baby at the end, like, I'm even alive. Spoiler, like,
Edgeman buttons.
All right. I'm going to push back on some of this. I actually didn't hate the Yuumi in the game versus RNG. What I hated was the way the Yuumi was played. And by that, I mean randomly dying in the laning phase in a 2v2 by mispositioning. I think that if G2 plays that lane more passively and they're able to scale into the late game with the Yuumi, and they have like Ezreal, Riven, and Viego with a Yuumi on top of them. Also, the Riven not running Flash was incredibly dumb. But like, why the fuck do you need the teleport? You should just run Flash Ignite and then played around the top side while Flakked sat and Yuumi sat under the tower scared, and then just played for late game. So I didn't hate the composition. I hated the way that G2, basically, the one thing they couldn't do was just die randomly early on in the bot lane and let Gala and Ming run out of control with the game, which is exactly what they did. And then without the flash on the Riven, you don't have a reliable source of engagement, especially if you're already behind. But I think if you have flash and you have a Yuumi on that Riven, and that Riven has a few kills, that becomes very, very scary. So I didn't hate the theory of it. I think the execution was fucking awful.
I think a problem for me, though, is that for me, like Targamas' biggest strength when he was back in the ERLs is like his ability to roam and move on the map. Like that was a big aspect of why he was so successful there. And also specifically, like one of the issues that came is like, for me, the reason stylistically why G2 are good in RNG is like Caps is a very strong laner. Like your Faker and Xiaohu are not the strongest lane, or like individual carries of their regions. Like you think of LPL, you think Knight and Rookie. You think of LCK, and although Showmaker's been a bit rougher this year, it's like Showmaker, Chovia, like these individual big carries.
The last few years, yeah, of course.
Yeah, exactly. But Caps is the big carry for EU. And you saw him in that game, like really giving it to Xiaohu. Like he was so much better individually in the laning phase, but Wei just set up a 10. And the problem is when you have this Yuumi, who, I mean, admittedly he did mess up, but also is like kind of trapped in lane
very
a bit more.
Like that.
Yeah, 100%, like 100% badly. But like in my mind, if you had I think if you had a support who could be more active, you could be able to maybe dislodge Wave from mid lane and then allow Caps to play the map. Because honestly, I think this is how G2 should play, is you just invest incredible resources into Caps to get control of mid lane. Once he's got control of mid lane, he can just control the map, especially if you like shut down Xiaohu. Like that was my big reasoning why I thought there'd be a good matchup. You trap Xiaohu in lane, then you give some resources bot lane towards Flakked, who is a more team fighting focused AD carry. Like he's not the strongest laner, and that's like my thought process of how they would stylistically match up to them. But I think the Yuumi that's why it didn't work for me. But yeah, I mean there was definitely very egregious execution issues. It definitely wasn't just the
yeah. So I think like the problem for me was not necessarily, I can see the theory behind the draft. It was some of the summoner choices and then the way that they played the draft that was the issue. Because I thought the draft was okay for G2, and I thought they just survive into the late game. Well, all of a sudden they're going to be very scary, but then they just completely ran it in the.
By the way, you've just said another cursed name, which opens up my demon Pandora's box of another topic that may indeed destroy your sanity. You ready for this one, Ochs? No, I'm not going back into the other topic. Don't worry about that bit. This is still in League of Legends. Right, this is the one. You've just said the name Flakked. And if anyone knows that, that is a cursed term for anyone who appears on camera to say, because of two reasons. One, he won 24 games in a row in the ULCS title, LEC title. So obviously he must be the best, right? Or you're a hater. And secondly, because he's Spanish and the Spanish community is enormous and go mental and go ham as fuck for the Spanish players, you also, I mean, even if he gets involved himself, you will get ratioed to fuck. In fact, here's the thing. That's scary for a lot of people. A lot of people that'll destroy their mentions. They'll go, ratio the fuck out of me. Flakked, come at me, bro. Ratio me. I want that engagement. But okay, normal people don't. So the discussion, the problem is it's hard to separate all that ambience out and actually talk about who he is as a player. Because I feel like it's the Gala story all over again, dude. It's like, the problem is, all the people I know who are experts about League, sort of either publicly or privately, do say, look, he's obviously not the best fucking EU AD carry. In fact, there's obviously even people who might not even be in LEC that might be as good. Like, it's just that he's fitting this team well. He plays his champions well. Now, here's the problem. I do notice people piped down like a motherfucker once they stopped that 24-0 streak, and suddenly we're having like killless games and stuff. So I want to get this sense for like, Ochs, where do you come down on this? Obviously, it's a tricky one. You got to be careful how you explain it. But how do you characterize the Flakked story? Because I just feel like my problem is just this. I don't give you elite status unless you like consistently do it. You have to really show me you're the best.
I mean, for me, the only two world-class players on G2 are the mid-jungle. And I feel like Flakked, my concern for this team coming in this tournament was, like, I thought the bot lanes for T1 and RNG are, like, phenomenal. It goes without saying T1, like, that's a no-brainer. But I thought, like, the gap there was too big. I thought Gala and Ming, especially with the meta we're currently in, like, the gap there is too big. And ultimately, like, to me, Targamas has been, as I said, in the URLs, was someone who's like very good at like finding opportunities to pair up with his jungler. And Flakked, I mean, he's good. If you give him gold, you put him in a team fight, especially when you're playing those compositions, he'll do his job.
Yep.
I feel like he's not quite there, which is fair enough. You know, he's near the roster, but like people
also
were
rookie.
Yeah. I saw people making comments like, dude, and I know like some of it's like the hype, but they're saying like Flakked best AD carry in the world, and I'm like, I can make a list of people like. I mean, like, because that's the problem is that when you say stuff like that, it's so ludicrous that you kind of take away from like the positives, right? Because as part of that big win streak, he was having some really solid performances he was delivering. But then because people are just like saying these ridiculous things, I'm just like, please stop talking. So that's my view. I think he does his job for the team, but it's really about the mid jungle. And that was my concern matching in the T1 or RNG is that the bot gap would be a big burden to overcome. And if mid jungle don't win and then able to move that pressure downwards, I think they would just collapse.
I mean, it's also just, I think, true that the majority of G2's win came off of Caps absolutely popping the fuck off. I mean, Caps had some insane individual performances, crazy outplays, very big highlights in the first couple of days of the Rumble stage. And yes, they won the last two against EG when Caps was struggling a bit in the top lane on Gwen. And certainly, but again, we touched on this earlier, Flakked and Targamas had a freebie of a lane into Ezreal Galio and were able to capitalize on that. And good for them. And Flakked, I think, did do a lot that game on Kai'Sa. And I think that, like you say, he does his job. But if we're actually talking about who is doing the carrying on this team. It is Caps. And like, if Caps isn't there, and you know, I think to pivot this conversation too, we have to talk about Broken Blade a little bit, because he's been kind of non-existent. He hasn't been the reason I would say they lose a lot of the time.
Remember, before the Caps like explosion in playoffs, they essentially played through Broken Blade. Yes. That was how the team worked.
But Broken Blades, I don't know what G2's read on the meta has been, because like his Vladimir has not been, I mean, it's been there. It hasn't been like a reason they're winning and losing the games. It certainly hasn't been wowing me as some sort of Gwen counterpick, which is what they seem to want to do with it. It's his most played champion at this tournament. And I don't think we look at it and be like, yeah, it was really the Vlad difference that carried that game. You know, his Riven performance, I think, was, you know, you needed more in that game because he was going to have to carry the early game and presumably have a big impact with the Yuumi on top of him in the late game. But he's been kind of just split pushing, like showing up kind of late to team fights on Vladimir and like cleaning some stuff up sometimes, or like running away from a team fight after he's been there late. I think he did a very good job playing into the Tryndamere on the Jax, but they did his, like, the Evil Geniuses game, in my opinion, was G2 understanding their win conditions and doing their job and capitalizing on a bot lane lead and just kind of waiting for those like item break points where they outscaled. And that's fine. I mean, that's good play, right? It's knowing when your composition has these advantages and pushing them. But Broken Blade has not been a standout player, and I don't really get the Vlad picks that are coming in, because it doesn't seem to be having a huge effect on the outcome of G2's matches.
Things I feel like he could have been, if they were utilizing correctly, exactly what the team needed, because like, you know, they can play through him if they need to, but also something that I wish we could do for Bin is they can just stick him on a tank, right? And he can function very well in that role, and it has been part of the big success. Yeah, and so it means that, you know, if you do want to invest resources on the bot side and you want to lean away from him, you know, you can put him on something stable. He's going to be relevant later. If you do want him to have a carry role, if you're on red side, if you want to have counter pick from him, that's also a viable option. I feel like one of the big strengths that he has in this tournament is that they've shown they can play with him in doing a diverse amount of styles, but then it feels like they've just been putting him in these really weird scenarios. As you said, the Vlad just like consistently hasn't really worked effectively.
It's not that it's been bad, guys. It just hasn't done anything.
Yeah, and I mean the whole point, like, if you're playing into Gwen, you either need to crush Gwen or you need to like somehow manage to match her impact in the later stages and be more relevant, which is hard. But the Vladimir's kind of just been there, and it's like there's definitely other things you could have picked that could have just been present there and then be more impactful later on. So no, I think hopefully we get to see G2 like reflect on their sort of stinky streak, and then I feel like they could definitely take a game off T1 if they came in. They were sort of like, you know, setting up Caps to be successful, and then the rest of the team were just essentially playing their role. It could definitely be enough to take a game, but it's just been such a weird dynamic. And that's the crazy thing, is that they started the Rumble stage so well, and then it just completely flipped backwards.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.